I had no knowledge about guerrilla filmmaking before I started this module, apart from the name, which I didn't know the meaning of. One thing that I heard from people, though, is that TV professionals don't like guerrilla filmmakers. And also, someone told me that we will be making 5 films in one term, so I thought, good, I'm taking it. I looked up the definition of guerrilla, and as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, guerrilla means a member of a small independent group taking part in irregular fighting, typically against larger regular forces. Originating from Spanish in the early 19th century, as defined in the Guerrilla Filmmaker's Pocketbook, the ultimate guide to digital filmmaking. Guerrilla filmmaking is a film made with no real resources, which is about no cash and bending all the rules to get it done. To some extent, this is what made the process of filmmaking challenging in the course of this module. To some extent, I feel like I could have made better films just because I am a student at the university and there is technical equipment which is available to me, like camera, sound, and lighting. However, I chose to go a different way and pretend as if I did not have any of these resources available to me. For some reason, I just thought that taking a professional camera would somehow betray the rules of guerrilla filmmaking. To me, it was kind of a betrayal of a guerrilla filmmaker's manifesto from our module booklet, which says that many filmmakers have not always tried to hide their poverty, but that they have also tried to make a virtue of it. I had a feeling that in order to preserve the genuinity of the challenges presented to us, I had to make films with the resources that were available to me personally and try to make my best with what I had rather than what has been given to me just because I'm privileged to be a student at the university with good professional filming equipment. With that in mind, I moved to my first challenge, and it was to make a film without moving images which responds to the question, what is Great Britain? I decided from the very beginning that each film I make will be personal to me and to my memories and perception of the world. So that's why my response to the question, what is Great Britain, was highly based on my memories of Great Britain from my childhood. I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to give a factual explanation to what Great Britain was, and however incorrect my opinion or perception was, it still answered the question of what is Great Britain to me. The main challenge to me here was to recreate my memories with the photos taken in the present time. The film I made was based on the memories of my 11 to 18 years old self. As for any teenager, this was the time of my life when I formed my worldview and rebelled against the societal conventions and just the stupid things in general. And however stupid the time of my life was, this film to me was the moment of nostalgia. And I felt that taking photos in present time did not answer this question accurately, so I decided to manipulate my photos so they could become a closer representation of what I felt and thought back then. These images were meant to represent my blurred memories and unrealistic fantasies about Great Britain that lived in my head for the longest time until I came to United Kingdom. I colorized inverted colors and blurred some images in order to fit this idea of a wrong perception. I wanted these images to look more like expressionist paintings. I just felt that would bring up the idea of the past. The inspiration behind this film's narrative was Lucas Moodyson's film, and it is called We Are the Best. Moodyson's film is about a teenage punk girl band in Stockholm. It seems to be highly based on coming of age story and kind of portrayed the struggle of teenagers and of so-called wannabes who find their true self in rebellion. Growing up in a city in a slightly conservative family, I experienced similar rebellious stages in my development. To me, Great Britain was all about punks, and to my parents, about education. To me, it was about Sex Pistols, and to my parents, it was about Queen and the Beatles. To me, Great Britain was about freedom of expression, and strangely enough, when I came to Great Britain at the age of 16, there was nothing what I expected. It wasn't about freedom of expression, it was about sameness, about blending in, about adapting to the new environment. And as well as that, standing out quite often means standing alone. It did resonate with the message that I wanted to convey in my film. I took this opportunity to say something that I've never said before and post it to the social media platforms such as YouTube. This medium, according to Joe Swanberg, Intimacy and the Digital Aesthetic by Eimer Jean Christian, shortens the distance between spectator and character and evokes intimacy, therefore allowing people to make an emphasis on selves and decontextualize individualism that nonetheless incorporates a desire for connection. To some extent, I would say that guerrilla films do evoke the desire to tell the story by any means necessary in order to connect and in order to be heard by a potential spectator. This leads me to my next film, which is about multiculturalism. I decided to approach this film a little bit differently, which perhaps made it more simple visually, however not as simple to make. I wanted to portray multiculturalism as a unity rather than as a difference. So hence why I decided to film a physical feature of a human that every one of us has, but which is also very different and unique in each one of us. This is the human eye. Similarly to our fingertips, our iris has a unique pattern, and the unique pattern of the iris is the representation of the multiculturalism, the representation of the difference. At the same time, our eyes function in the same ways with slight differences in every human, but they do provide us vision. They are referred as mirrors to the soul. Person can convey the message regardless of their language, of their culture and nationality. Our body language and the language of our eyes creates the unity between people of all cultures. More than that, our eyes resemble the planet. We are all united by the universe and we belong to its natural complexes. To express that, I used the voice of philosopher Alan Watts. I closely relate to the points that he makes in his speech, and I felt that his speech gives the best representation to my understanding of cultures. Here, the main challenge was to make a film using a mobile phone, and perhaps this is the most accessible filmmaking tool for any amateur filmmaker, and to an extent even more enjoyable, as at the end of the day, there is some kind of pleasure to say that I made this film using just my phone. And here I feel closely related to what this person said in his interview with Sight and Sound magazine, that amateur film modes are always unexpected, but the emotions and sentiments they invest in it are always precise and palpable. They ignore the so-called professional methods so that they have more diverse ideas and values. They free themselves from conventional customs and restraints to an infinite space for creations. To me, this was true, as I felt like when I used my phone, which to some might seem a limitation, I had more freedom to express myself and more freedom to create what I wanted to create. To some extent, phone is also a bit less intimidating when you approach people on the streets in order to make your film. This film is about multiculturalism from its making to the screening, as multiculturalism to me is hugely about communication as well. well. Perhaps I cheated a little bit as I used a macro lens for an iPhone that I borrowed from someone else in the university. I then went out and shot this film on the streets of London. That was a great conversation starter, and I got to speak to a lot of people from various backgrounds and cultures, which developed my communication skills and creativity when I was approaching people on the streets. I believe that it resonates with the other point from guerrilla filmmaking, manifesto, which is students will learn how to make most of what resources they have. Students will embrace what in different contexts we might call the amateur, the imperfect, and the minor. I had a long debate with myself when I thought about my next film idea. I wasn't sure what theme this film would fit in. It was kind of both political and human rights. I decided to follow the human rights path at the end, and I made a film based on the third article in the Declaration of Human Rights. One has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. It strikes me how much power certain people in societal hierarchy have given themselves an ability to decide who is ought to live and who is ought to die. More often these decisions are made on a political basis, and very often they are unfair and inhumane. To me, making a human rights film was a tough task, as such issues are always based on opinions that can be supported by some and can be found wrong by others. One film that influenced me a lot was Mahdi Flyful film, A World Not Ours, which is about generations of Palestinian refugees living in a refugee camp in southern Lebanon. This film made me realize how innocent people suffer from political and nationalist conflicts around the world. And more than that, how much political and nationalist ideas spread and plant in the brains of people around the world, making a huge impact on their mindsets and interpretations of life, death, war, and peace. Thus said, I strongly believe that hurt people hurt people. Therefore, if a person was hurt in their life, this person will hurt other people back. Although I do understand that there is always a reason behind every conflict, and there is always two sides of a coin, but it doesn't change the fact that people hurt each other as the result of being hurt, and this is a never-ending cycle. The other part of the challenge was to make a film where the sound and the image won't go in sync. I decided to use the national anthems of different countries and use them as a contradictory soundtrack to the image. We see anthems as something that makes us proud of our countries. However, when you read into the words of these anthems, you may notice how horrifying some lyrics are. For example, the Vietnamese anthem that opens my film has the following words: "Our steps resound in the long and arduous road. Our flag, red with blood of victory, bears the spirit of the country. The distant rumbling of guns mingles with our marching song. The path of glory is built by the bodies of our foes." Although these words are full of pride, it was scary to imagine how much terror these words bear. I decided to edit and reconstruct the words of John Lennon, who was a supporter of anti-war movement and was a peace activist. I felt that Lennon's words that ask for peace work well in contradiction with the images that were shown in my film. However, I decided to deconstruct his words and the meaning they had in some places. Lennon's words, along with many others, were not heard, therefore the meaning of these words were lost in time. I feel like the meaning of Lennon's words was perverted in my film, and one may see it as a glorification of violence, which was one of the main criticisms that I got for this film. However, to some extent I wanted to show that violence already is glorified, which is done even in national anthems. And although this film was a little bit risky to make and reception of this film wasn't as positive, I believe that guerrilla filmmakers are ought to make films that portray more of the individuality of a filmmaker rather than a social appeal. Jeffrey Scott's cited Vale's and Juno's introduction to their incredibly strange film's text. The value of low-budget films is that they can be transcendent expression of a single person's individual vision. They often present unpopular, even radical, views addressing social, political, racial or sexual inequities, hypocrisy in religion or government, or in other ways they assault taboos related to the presentation of sexuality, violence and more. And my last film was highly personal to me. It was a love letter and I hesitated to show it for the longest time. It was the first film that I started making for this module. However, this was the last one that I actually showed in class. When I approached this theme from the very beginning, I knew that I didn't want to make just a regular love letter. I wanted to tackle an issue that would be very close to me personally, and I decided to write a letter which would address an idea of letters being replaced by technology. It saddens me to see how technology replaces human interactions, and although technology is an amazing medium and it allows us to interact more often and faster with each other, I strongly believe that there is nothing more valuable than personal interaction. And when a personal interaction isn't an option, letters would be the closest thing to the physical contact with a person who's far away. One text that influenced the narrative of my film wasn't included in a selection of films in Guerrilla filmmaking module, but it was a Japanese anime that I've seen quite recently, and it's called Serial Experiments Lane. Although this might seem like a very weird source of inspiration, this anime also tackles a theme of human interactions and being lost in the web. It does refer to the internet as the actual web, where a person can get stuck in without any ability to escape. I like to think about technology in such way as it's truly a medium our society is addicted to, and this medium affects our interactions with friends, family and the loved ones. Stylistically, my influences come from such directors as Terrence Malick and Andrei Tarkovsky, who also use kind of very cinematic images and voiceover. And although I have a long way to practice and develop these techniques, this is the film technique that I really want to employ in my own filmmaking and which is the closest to me and my personality. I believe that I successfully implemented these techniques in the love letter film that I made. Although to me this film was very personal, I still decided to share it on the internet because I was pleased with how this film turned out. I posted it on my Vimeo page, on my YouTube channel and on Facebook. I gained feedback from people I know, but also gained feedback from people who just happened to watch my film online. An issue for me was that this film was so personal that it was quite hard to accept any negative feedback. However, I believe that perhaps feedback also comes from personal experiences and perceptions, which are all valuable in the process of development as a filmmaker. Overall, I believe that this module made me stronger in my views and allowed me to develop as a filmmaker and even find myself and find a vision. It taught me to express myself, to make films despite any obstacles, whether these obstacles are personal issues, lack of equipment, fear of judgment, or lack of inspiration. All ideas have a right to existence, bad or good. What I learned is that even when hesitant or scared, it's better to generate bad ideas, as from bad ideas, good ideas may occur, rather than generate no ideas at all. I want to end this video diary with a quote from The Imperfect Cinema by Julio Garcia Espinosa. Anyone engaged in an artistic activity asks himself at a given moment what the meaning is whatever he is doing. The simple fact is that this anxiety arises demonstrates that factors exist to motivate it, factors which in turn indicate that art does not develop freely. The sure thing, however, is that art, like a capricious little devil, continues to show its face sporadically in no matter which tendency.